Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. Nobody likes to be fooled by someone. We grow up to trust the word of people, especially those close to us, and so when they use their position into fooling us into making a bad decision, this especially hurts. Back in chapter 3, Haman had convinced Ahasuerus to order that the Jews be killed because they had laws different to other people's and did not follow the king's law. Such would be treason, and it would be understandable that a king might try to destroy a people that did this. Now, yes, even here Ahasuerus was going too far, but he was a pagan king, and so we should expect they act sinfully even when supposedly executing justice. But Ahasuerus is going to find out that the Jews are not such a people, and that he has been tricked. How that came about, we'll find out as we read Esther 7. So if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to the book of Esther, to Esther chapter 7. We're going to be reading from verses 1 through 10. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Esther chapter 7, beginning at verse 1. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman." Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. We have now come to the second banquet that was set by Esther for the king and Haman. Remember, she delayed in chapter 5 for an unknown reason. In that time, God was at work, bringing about the events that we will see in chapter 7. He worked through the pride of Haman, and he worked through the restless night of Ahasuerus to elevate Mordecai. We didn't say this in the last lesson, but this elevation will have an effect of showing Ahasuerus that the Jews are not who Haman says they are. They are a decent people, law-abiding people who respect the rule of the king. Should Ahasuerus have known this before? Yes, but better late than never, as they say. But before we get to Ahasuerus' revelation to this, we must first get to the banquet on the second day. So we have Esther, the king, and Haman present at this banquet. Wine is present at this banquet, as seems to be the case at all the banquets of the king. And again, the king asks Esther what she desires, up to half the kingdom. And this time, Esther does not delay. She begins by knowing her place before the king. She is not above him, nor is she his equal, even though she is his wife. He was the ruler, and if she was going to have her request granted, she must find favor in the eyes of the king. She realizes that the king could say no, and the king could order her death, but she prayed that the king would say yes. She goes on to tell the king that she and her people have been sold to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. These words were the same 3 words used in the king's decree concerning the Jews back in Esther 3, verse 13. Making it quite clear that what Esther was referring to was the annihilation of the Jews. Now, this was likely the first time that he learned that his wife was Jewish, which would be a revelation in and of itself, but that she was under this death warrant as well, I'm sure would be crushing to Ahasuerus. He had, while drunk, dismissed Vashti as queen, a decision he later regretted. And now he had been bamboozled into executing his wife through an edict he signed with his own hand. Esther continued by saying that her people simply been sold into slavery, she would have held her tongue. For even though the king couldn't really be compensated for Jews being put as slaves, they would at least remain alive. However, with a death warrant being issued, the situation was much more serious, for not only couldn't the king be compensated monetarily for the loss that he would incur, even with Haman's payment, he would also lose some of his reputation for killing a people that did not deserve such. Ahasuerus had seen through the demeanor of his wife and the actions of Mordecai that this picture painted by Haman of the Jews being this different people with different laws and a rebellious spirit was not accurate at all. Esther meekly supplicated for the king to save her people. She didn't demand it, and she did so at great risk to herself. Mordecai had heard of a plot against a king, a foreign king at that. He could have kept it to himself, choosing not to meddle in foreign affairs, but he didn't, and the king was saved. Haman was a liar and had tricked Ahasuerus into signing the decree. But instead of jumping to conclusions as he had been guilty of in the past, Ahasuerus asked Esther who would do such a deed. I believe Ahasuerus knew, but he wanted confirmation. Esther said it was the evil Haman. Nobody had put Haman up to it, as was evidenced by Haman not claiming it was someone else. Haman was guilty, and he knew it. Ahasuerus, though, was furious at Haman and likely himself for allowing himself to be tricked in this way, so he left the room momentarily, leaving Haman the opportunity to fall on Esther's couch at her feet in order to beg for his life. He knew the type of man Ahasuerus was, and so he likely thought that if he could get Esther to plead for his life, just as she did for the Jews, that Ahasuerus would back down and at least not kill him. Such a move backfired, though, for with Haman at the queen's feet, Ahasuerus returned to the room and saw the scene, which he interpreted as Haman attempting to seduce his wife while he was still in the house. And that was the last straw. Haman's fate had been sealed, and he was executed in the very gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai. It is said that the king's wrath subsided following this, but there was still a problem. Sure, Haman had been dealt with, but the edict remained, and it remained in a system that didn't allow edicts of the king to be changed. How would the Jews end up being saved? We'll find that out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Esther chapter 8, verses 1 to 17, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.